Success! Oh, hi. Glad you're here. I'm glad to be with you. I'm just gonna. I tried not to write all these things down on this list. I'm gonna talk about the most influential, life-changing, impactful. I keep saying influential. I think what I really mean is impactful because I'm not like a filmmaker. But the most impactful life course, like the films that came out in 1996 that I'm gonna talk about. Yeah, I can't with this chronological order. I do have a list though, but I'm just gonna go down the list. Maybe save a couple particular for last. I'll start with one in particular because let me tell you a little story. Speaking of soundtracks, I forgot to mention in the last one that Batman Forever, being my favorite Batman film, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie had an amazing soundtrack that I owned on cassette tape at the time. I currently own it on CD, but I had it on cassette tape at the time and listened to it over and over and over and over and over and over and over. That's a really good soundtrack. Like, I still to this day sing on a regular basis Shampoo and their song Uh-Oh, We're in Trouble. That's a great jam. You've got Devo on that soundtrack with Are You Ready? Another great jam featured very, very, very usefully in the film. And you've got Red Hot Chili Peppers, Higher Ground, plus the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers theme in a full rock and roll way. Like, that's a great soundtrack, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. So I wanted to acknowledge that and touch on that since I forgot to in the last video. Just like Batman Forever, as I was saying. Batman Forever being a great soundtrack. Sure, there's the Seal song that everyone knows, but I prefer like Bad Days is a great song on that film, where when you're asleep, do whatever you want, like kill your boss and stuff like that. Not like, I have a great boss, but anyway, the whole idea that your bad days will end when you sleep late, because enjoy your dreams and the fantasy of it. I had some horrid dreams last night, though. Let me tell you, I'm glad I woke up from that. But specifically, the Batman Forever soundtrack, I should mention. That's another reason why it was on the list. Same with Power Rangers. The Batman Forever soundtrack was the very first CD that I ever bought at Sam Goody with my allowance money. The very first CD I ever bought was in 1995. So I wanted to acknowledge that. I was 12 years old. Yeah. The very first CD I ever owned was a friend who had some CDs, and they said I could have one. So the very first CD I ever owned was a gift, and that was Crash Test Dummies, featuring the song and God Shuffled His Feet, which is a great album, by the way. I still have that CD, and I still have that Batman Forever CD. Anywho, moving on. The reason I bring that up is because a movie in 1996 that had a huge impact on me was That Thing You Do. I love that movie. Love it up and down. Tom Hanks, first time directing, about a fictional band, pretty much inspired by the Beatles. But I just love that movie. It was my introduction to, dang it, what's his name? He's the funny one. And then he has the hilarious commentary on Wrong Turn? Or is it Joyride? Now I can't even remember. What's his name? You know who I'm talking about. Brain fart? He's the funny one in That Thing You Do when they're being interviewed. And he's like, oh, I'm not with these guys. I'm here hoping to get the blue ribbon for my... Yeah. Gosh, Anyway, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You can look it up. You know who I'm talking about. He was in that other movie with Mila Jovovich where they were tourists. My brain's not working right now. That's why I'm doing these videos, so that when, my brain starts to deteriorate, at least I have these things on record. But That Thing You Do has an amazing soundtrack. An amazing soundtrack. that to this day I listen to on a regular basis. Like the song "That Thing You Do" is a banger, like a banger. Boom, bam, bam, boom, bam, boom, bam, bam, boom, bam, bang, 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 bang. You like that's a great song. But then the soundtrack altogether has my amazing songs, "Loving You Lots and Lots" and "Mr. Downtown." I mean, those are just the first two that come to mind. So I have to acknowledge that. Most of these I was just trying to mention briefly, and we're already like 5 minutes into this. So thanks for sticking around, I guess. Let's keep on trucking. Joe's Apartment. Joe's Apartment, I'm just gonna mention because it was MTV's first film, which was a big deal back then. Like, what? MTV's making a movie? But it was based on their little show because they had the show Joe's Apartment, and then they turned it into a movie. Just back then, it was a big deal, very memorable for a guy whose apartment was infested with roaches, but his roaches could talk, so he had talking roaches, and the roaches were funny. Okay, let's see. What else? The Cable Guy. The Cable Guy may not be a favorite among Jim Carrey fans, but I just remember two things of that movie. Which will lead me to another. Okay, so Cable Guy, Jim Carrey. I often quote The Cable Guy, which is him quoting Silence of the Lambs when he's at medieval times, and he's got the meat on his face, and he's like, "Hello, Clarice, it's good to see you again," which was either in the trailer or was a clip, because I didn't see that movie for the longest time, but I knew that scene, so that scene was more memorable before I even saw the movie, and to this day, it's the most memorable part of the movie. However, that movie does feature the song by Filter, "Hey Man, Nice Shot," one of my favorite songs of all time, that blew my mind when I first heard it, and I listened to it on repeat, but I first heard that song in a movie that I failed to mention in last video, which is one of my favorite films of all time, Tales from the Crypt Demon Knight. I love Tales from the Crypt Demon Knight. And it opened with Filter's "Hey Man, Nice Shot," as far as the actual story, not the little Crypt Keeper introduction thing. And my friend had me over, and again, another one of those scenarios where he's like, "Hey, I just want to show you this part before we actually watch the movie in its entirety." And it was that part because he was like, "You got to hear this song," and I loved that song. With that bass line, like a great song. Look it up. Filters, "Hey Man, Nice Shot." Look up any of the songs that I mentioned because they're all fantastic. So I forgot to mention Tales from the Crypt, Demon Knight, which is one of my favorite films of all time. It does feature a woman's whose name I have to keep out of my mouth, so we won't go there. But it also features death from Bill and Ted, and it's a great movie. It's a great movie. I love Tales from the Crypt Demon Knight. It's a very underrated gem and very quotable. I quote it all the time. It's so much fun every time I see it. I actually met the guy who was also in it, who plays Roger Rabbit. Anywho, so that's why I'm gonna mention the sequel, Tales from the Crypt Bordello of Blood. It's alright. It's no Demon Knight, but it's alright. It's a good time. But speaking of Demon Knight, which featured Billy Zane, who was star of The Phantom, I'm just going to mention The Phantom because I didn't really see it until like a decade ago. It's okay. But I have his ring. It's a skull ring. I'd grab it, but my son was playing with it, so I don't know where it is. But I have a replica of his ring. It's the Phantom ring. Okay, what else can we talk about? Let's just go down the list. Alf was a made-for-TV movie that came out that year, and I'm only mentioning it even though it was made for TV because I love Alf. I own every episode. I love Alf. Eat all them cats. Tremors 2. I don't think I ever mentioned Tremors 1. Tremors 1 was a huge deal. I love that movie. Love that movie. Love that movie. Tremors 2 is a great sequel, and I've seen every single Tremors movie, even the Jamie Kennedy ones. Speaking of Jamie Kennedy, we'll get there. I'm taking too much time trying to figure out which one to talk about next, so let's just go down the line. No, let's save that. Hellraiser Bloodline. Hellraiser Bloodline is the fourth? Third. One, two, no, third is it three? Is it four? It's got Adam Scott in it, believe it or not. Bloodline takes place in 3 timelines: past, present, future. It technically is the end, chronological death of Pinhead. Spoiler alert. Great movie, though. I think it's underrated. It's like a trilogy in one movie. I love it. I love Bloodline. I love Hellraiser 1 through 6. I love Hellraiser 1 through 6. I love Hellraiser 1 through 6. Is Bloodline 3? I think it is 3. No, 3 is Hell on Earth. My bad. Okay. Hellraiser Bloodline was Hellraiser 4. Okay. Discussed. Trees Lounge. I'm going to mention Trees Lounge. It's a Steve Buscemi directed film, and I hate Steve Buscemi for doing this. But he cast a young Chloe Sevigny, which is why I watched this movie and own this movie, and I love her. She's like 19 when she did this movie, but she was playing... Wait, was she? 96? She was like 21. Okay, she was like 21 when she made the movie, but she was playing a 17-year-old. She was really good at that because she's gorgeous. She's currently 48 years old and looks 30. She's the most beautiful. Don't get me started on Chloe. So I love that Chloe's in it, but I hate that Steve Buscemi plays a guy who makes out with a 17-year-old Chloe. And how dare you? Like if I was making a movie and Chloe was 21, I probably would have done the same thing. But I would have made her an 18-year-old. So I get it. I get why he did it, but shame on him for doing that to Chloe. Romeo and Juliet. I couldn't grasp or get into Shakespeare until Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes' Romeo and Juliet, featuring John Leguizamo. An amazing cast, an amazing film. The fact that they were able to utilize modern times, call guns swords so they didn't have to change any dialogue, used every single word of Shakespeare's dialogue, but in modern day. And the music, speaking of soundtracks, I own both Volume 1, Volume 2, one being the score, one being the songs featured. Both soundtracks are amazing, immaculate, featuring dialogue. One of the first times I had a soundtrack feature dialogue. I believe Pulp Fiction also did that a while earlier. But Romeo and Juliet, that is my favorite Shakespearean adaptation film, period. Like, I love that movie so much. I won't get started too much on the story and how ridiculous it is and how it's more of a cautionary tale, not a romantic film, because don't murder yourself and don't think that someone you just met when you were high on drugs and you think is pretty is the end-all be-all of your life, especially when you're that young. Like, move on. It's about lust, really, not love. Anywho, it's brilliant. It's freaking brilliant. And I've always appreciated Shakespeare ever since because of that movie. The recent Coen-directed Tragedy of Macbeth is my second favorite Shakespeare adaptation. Anyway, that Romeo and Juliet I could watch every day for the rest of my life. Absolutely fantastic. Dragonheart, the original with the dragon, voiced by Sean Connery. My parents surprised me with a trip to Canada. This was the last time I've been to my homeland of Canada. So I would have been 13 years old. It was my 13th birthday. Yep. And I went to Canada with my father. And while we were there, we went to the movies. Went to this little movie theater. And we're like, okay, cool. It was like a movie theater at a mall. Average movie theater. 2 tickets for Dragonheart. Sweet. That'll be that theater way down at the end of the hall. I had never been in a movie theater that small in my life. Like, the screen was like if they were using the projector at school. It was the smallest movie theater screen I'd ever seen in my life for that particular showing. I mean, I know now working in a movie theater how it works. Some screens are bigger than others. But our smallest screen is like 3 times bigger than this screen at that theater at that showing. End of the hall, the screen was maybe twice as big as a big TV. Like, seriously. The auditorium held maybe 20 people. 30 tops. Like, it was the teeniest, tiniest little theater and the teeniest, tiniest little screen. My dad, I think, ended up complaining and was like, oh, that's just where this showing is. But we'd never been in such a small theater ever before or since. So I remember watching Dragonheart in a teeny tiny theater on a teeny tiny screen with 2 other people in an auditorium that sat 25 in Canada. Good time. Thinner. I'm just going to bring up Thinner. I don't think I've ever seen that movie. I don't. But I quote it all the time because that trailer was so impactful when it goes, Thinner! So, when the gypsy puts the curse on him or something. I don't know, whatever the heck. I never seen it. And I watched a behind the scenes thing about how they made the fat guy. They had to make the regular guy fat, and then they had to make the fat guy then skinny, and then the regular guy scrawny. So that was one of those, behind the scenes shows I would watch on cable on like Sci-Fi Channel. So I knew all about Thinner. Very memorable. And that line. Thinner! Look up the Thinner trailer and you'll see what I'm talking about. Mystery Science Theater 3000, the movie, came out in 96. And my best friend Matt and I, who is the creator of Madness, yeah, true story, I was in that basement when he made that first video. We went and saw this movie. We were big fans of MST3K. Summer break when I was in like middle school. Summer break was a big deal because I could watch certain television programs that would normally air on cable television while I was in school, like Parker Lewis Can't Lose, My Two Dads, and Sci-Fi Channel would constantly play Mystery Science Theater 3000, which was like a 2-hour-long show where I got a movie out of the deal. So that's how I became obsessed with Mystery Science Theater 3000. So when him and I got to see the movie in theaters, seeing Mystery Science Theater 3000 in theaters just blew our minds. We were laughing hysterically. I absolutely loved that movie. The all everlasting gobstopper is the most memorable and I think my favorite joke in the whole film. It's absolutely fantastic. I love that movie. Twister I'll never forget seeing. I saw at the location where I currently work. And I had a huge crush on Helen Hunt, which I believe was my main motivation for seeing the film, but I also liked Bill Paxton, and I wanted to see cool tornadoes. This was in the early days of CG, and it was like, wow, we'd never seen such a thing, and things couldn't have been done before. But the most impactful part of that memory was when I saw that with my parent and brother, I think. I just know my oldest brother was there, and he left right as the trailers started to go have a cigarette, which always stuck with me for 2 reasons. One, that was my first memory of being concerned that someone would miss part of a movie. When I go to a movie with someone, it drives me nuts when they miss part of it. Whether they're late from getting concessions or they leave to use the bathroom. I had a rant about that in the last video. I literally just watched The Disaster Artist with my crew, and like every single one of them left twice in a movie that's an hour and 45 minutes. We didn't have no trailers. Like, how do you not have bladder control? Anyway, but he went to have a cigarette, and I'm like, really? Oh, and the other thing that stuck with me was that you can't go 2 hours without having a cigarette. I was a smoker for a good 15, 20 years. Since have not been a smoker for a good 5 to 10. But, so I get it. Like, I need a cigarette before the movie, and I need a cigarette after the movie. But to time it like that, it just drove me nuts. Of course he got back with plenty of time, because now as a manager of a movie theater, I know perfectly well your average trailer time is 20 minutes. On average, you're going to get 20 minutes of trailers. Sometimes 25 to 30, depending on the format, the movie, and the theater. We have no control over that. I want you to know that. The studios tell us you're playing these trailers before this movie. Period, the end. We have no control over that. So don't complain to us. How can you... Take it up with the studio, okay? Leave us alone. Thank you. We're getting down to the nitty-gritty. These are pretty memorable. Mars Attacks is my favorite Tim Burton film. Period, the end. He has a large filmography, and I love every single one of his movies, but Mars Attacks is by far my favorite Tim Burton film. That cast, it is so hilarious. Great story, great visual effects. Please do not run. We are your friends. My best friend at the time and I went to see this movie at the age of 13 together and laughed our butts off throughout. We loved it so much. But the thing that made us laugh hysterically, and I don't think we even really got the joke at the time, we just thought the person looked and sounded weird. But now as an adult, I kind of get why. Because now I get the joke. But at the time, we just thought it was funny. We thought this person was a weird-looking, weird-sounding idiot asking a dumb question. We could not stop quoting and not stop laughing at the part. Will the Martians have two sexes like we do? Anyway, if you know what I'm talking, if you know, you know. But back then we didn't really know. We just thought that was hilarious. Fargo. Fargo came out that year. I'm just going to mention Fargo because I remembered my middle brother rented the movie when it came out on VHS from Blockbuster. And I couldn't watch it because it was rated R, but I wanted to try to sneak it. So when he was at school or something, or anyway, he wasn't there, and no one else was, I guess. I put the tape in just to see if I could watch a few minutes. And as soon as it started, it was the hotel scene with the hitmen and their ladies having relations together in the hotel room. So I immediately saw that. That was probably my first... Yeah, that was probably my first instance of pornography? Because I'd seen nudity before that, but I had yet to see sex acts before that. And then it dawned on me, oh, my brother has the tape at this particular point. Yeah, not like DVDs. The tape is going to start where you left off. Mission Impossible. Mission Impossible, Mission Impossible. Mission Impossible is one of my favorite franchises of all time. I can't believe that one of my favorite characters from one of my favorite franchises this year, the actor who portrays him, is in 2 of my favorite franchises. No, I'm not talking about Tom Cruise. I'm talking about how Scream just had Kittredge in it as the therapist. And he's coming back in the new Mission Impossible, which is 7? Dead Reckoning, Part 1. Kittredge is one of my favorite characters from the first one. The first one will always be my favorite. I love the first one so much. The soundtrack, what an amazing soundtrack. I absolutely love that soundtrack. I listened to that soundtrack nonstop. You had Bono and Edge doing it was Edge and anyway, it was you two guys doing the theme. I love that movie so much. I love that movie so much. Nothing will be better than the first one with the heist, with the breaking into CIA headquarters, with so many quotable lines. Such a great soundtrack. It's got Bjork on it. But the Danny Elfman score, that score, not just the theme, but the score throughout. I remember listening to it on an airplane. And I thought it was the most intense, coolest, spy-ridden, espionage-filled, suspenseful plane ride of my life. Just because I'm listening to this suspenseful Danny Elfman Mission Impossible music. If you know, you know. Like the Langley, the CIA headquarters scene, all that music in that scene is like my favorite song on the soundtrack. And I was listening to that on a plane. And it's like, if you look at a person sitting in their seat while listening to that music, all of a sudden you're in a Mission Impossible film. Love the first Mission Impossible. So much. Anyway, I believe I bought that soundtrack in Canada. Yeah, I bought that soundtrack in Canada during that vacation where we saw Dragonheart. Now I remember. Both that and the Friends soundtrack, just so I could listen to I'll Be There For You over and over and over and over and over again. It was the Rembrandts. No, it was the Rembrandts album. With the bonus tracks I'll Be There For You as seen from Friends. And then the other track, This House Is Not a Home, which I still remember. I haven't heard that song in decades, but I still remember it. This house is not a home without you. Anyway, the 2 remaining films I'll try to mention briefly, but the runner-up by far would be Scream. The original Scream, still my favorite. That movie changed my life. I didn't see it then, so it's the runner-up as far as most impactful and life-changing, even though it was definitely the most impactful and life-changing. If you see my troubled teens, which I don't recommend watching, but if you did, you know the story of how much of a negative impact this film had on me, because it did influence me to do some things with a particular costume and weapon and mask and ex-girlfriend that I shouldn't have plotted, but I learned I'm incapable of such horrendous things. But I love that movie. It just did things to my brain when I was, what, 15, 16 when I saw it? 14 or 15? Yeah. So it was a few years later, but I'll never forget when it came out, because it came out during Christmas of 96. So I was in 8th grade, and my first introduction to Scream was when we came back from Christmas break. Back then we called it Christmas break, now it's winter break. But when we came back from Christmas break, all of my 8th grade classmates were talking about Scream. Oh, did you see Scream? Oh, yeah. How many times did you Scream? Oh, I saw Scream so many times. Who's your favorite character? Oh, my favorite character was Stu. That was my introduction, was my favorite character was Stu. And then they would keep referencing the line, my mom and dad are going to be so mad at me. Oh, man, I love that part. Oh, man. And I'm like, I remember my only thought being, how the hell did all these people see Scream? It's rated R. And we're 13. They didn't go with their parents. Back then, it was a lot easier to get into an R-rated movie. It was a lot easier to get away with buying R-rated tickets without them IDing you. And it was a lot easier to sneak into the movies. Don't think that's the case anymore, because literally almost every single day, I kick out teenagers who think that it's easy. But it's not. We ID you. If you're not 17, you don't get a ticket. If you don't have someone who's 21 or older, you don't get to go. If they leave, we know they left and we'll kick you out. If you then buy a ticket, the crew will tell the management, hey, this person wanted to see Scream, but they couldn't, so they got a ticket for something else. We're then watching them, waiting for them to try to sneak into the R-rated movie, and then we kick them out. And every single time, I swear, it's 2023, but kids still act like it's the 90s. They always, okay, no one's looking, let's go. We're looking. I'm in the office, looking at my cameras. We've been watching you the whole time. And as soon as you go into the wrong theater, we kick you out without a refund. So don't think you can sneak into movies, because you can't. Definitely not on my watch. Definitely not in my theater. I love kicking out teenagers, and I have to do it every single week. Scream just came out this past weekend. Guess what I was doing all day Saturday? There was at least a dozen. And none of them got to watch that movie. They all tried, and they all tried many different ways. But Scream, the original, changed my life. I still have my Scream mask that I had in my pocket over the weekend, and I was wearing this hat. I was very excited for Scream 6. I love every single film in that franchise, but the first one will always be my favorite. Stu is my favorite, yada, yada, yada. I got to meet Matthew Lillard. I got to meet Skeet Ulrich. I had them both sign my little Scream action figure poster that I got back in the 90s. I still have my Father Death mask from the 90s before it was tagged as Ghostface when Scream 2 came out. And I wore that mask in a scenario that would be reminiscent of the films. But I'm not supposed to talk about that. Number one most influential film of 1996 that impacted my life was Independence Day. Because it's the first time a film in my life was that big of a deal. Like, that big of a deal. Like, everyone was talking about it. The advertisement was everywhere. The anticipation was insane. The trailers were like, oh my gosh, what are we going to see? When you go to the movie, you had not even seen the flying saucer yet. All the trailers were just aliens are coming. And stuff was going to blow up. The reveals in that movie, I'll just never forget what a huge deal that was. I had the toys. I had watched every single behind-the-scenes thing. It was the first time I would watch, like, premiere stuff. Like, the first time they would air premiere deals. I think Toy Story was around then, too. It was the first time this was a global phenomenon that everyone was going to see that movie that weekend. Which, by the way, a movie called Independence Day actually came out on July 3rd. Independence Day weekend. And it was one of the first movies I saw multiple times in theaters. And I remember the second time I saw it, I went by myself to the mall where I now work. And I sat in the back row. And it was like the first time ever in my life I sat in the back row. But I was so glad I did. Because I could see, especially back then before auditorium seating, I could see the entire crowd of a sold-out theater. And it was my first experience with jump scares, like when they're cutting the thing open that they think is dead, and then there's a jump scare. I got to see hundreds of people simultaneously. Ah! And it was just the greatest thing, because I knew it was coming, but it was their first viewing. That was my first experience with, if it's opening weekend, and it's a movie like that, that's either a big deal, or a jump scare, or an applaud MCU. I see it multiple times on opening weekend so that I can experience it with the crowd over and over and over that's seeing it for the first time. So Independence Day, huge deal. I loved it so much, I quote it to this day on a regular basis. It was a life-changing film because it was the first time I saw a film like that changed everyone's lives. And I watch it every year. Bill Pullman's speech, are you kidding me? One of the greatest speeches of all time. So yeah, I could go on and on, but I think you get the gist. It was just such a phenomenon, and I'd never experienced a phenomenon like that. It was a big deal. It was a big deal. I don't know if you were alive or remember 1996, but if you were and do, you know what I'm talking about. Independence Day was a big freaking deal. Oh, but now it does star a guy who likes to slap people on live television. Just keep his wife's name out your mouth. I did. Okie dokie.